I need to tell this story, not because I'm proud of what I did, but because I need to finally unburden myself of the truth of it. What happened with my brother wasn't just a simple argument, it was a reckoning. The air in my tiny Logan Square apartment was thick with the smell of roasted chicken and my brother's smug superiority. He picked up a chipped ceramic mug from my coffee table, the one I'd bought at a thrift store for $1, and examined it like it was a piece of evidence at a crime scene. "Honestly, Chloe," Ethan said, his voice dripping with faux concern as he addressed our parents seated on my lumpy second-hand couch, "I just worry. A woman your age, 32, living like a college student. This place can't be more than 400 square feet. It's bleak." He placed the mug back down, the slight click on the wood echoing the final snap of my patience. "If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The Sunday dinner was my idea, a peace offering of sorts. It had been months since we'd all been together. And I was foolishly optimistic that things might be different. Ethan and his wife, Jessica, had just returned from a 2-week tour of the Amalfi Coast, a trip he documented with a kind of relentless, glossy perfection that made Instagram feel like a weapon. He was a senior vice president at a downtown investment firm, the golden son who had fulfilled every one of our parents' upper-middle-class dreams. I, on the other hand, was the artistic one, a narrative they'd settled on. To gently explain my apparent lack of ambition, I told them I was a freelance graphic designer, taking on small projects to make ends meet. It was a plausible story, just enough to pay for my cheap apartment and my quiet, unassuming life. It was also a complete and total lie. "It's cozy," my mom said, though her eyes darted around, taking in the exposed brick I'd painted myself, the mismatched furniture I'd lovingly restored, the small galley kitchen where a gourmet meal had just been miraculously produced. Her defense was weak, a paper shield against Ethan's cannon fire. My dad just grunted in agreement, his attention fixed on the preseason football game, muted on my small television. He'd always let Ethan lead. "Cozy is what you call a cabin in the woods, Mom. This is a closet in a city that's passing her by," Ethan continued, leaning back and lacing his fingers behind his head. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that I knew cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I keep telling her I can get her a real job, an entry-level marketing position at my firm, stable salary, 401k, a real future. Instead, she's here. Tinkering with her little drawings, Jessica, perched elegantly on the edge of a dining chair I'd rescued from a back alley, chimed in with her signature saccharin poison. "Oh, Ethan, don't be mean. Her portfolio is very creative. I'm sure one day a big client will notice." She patted my arm, her diamond wedding ring catching the light, a tiny, brilliant star in the dim galaxy of my living room. The condescension was so thick I could feel it coating my throat. I just smiled, a tight, brittle thing. I served the chicken, the potatoes au gratin I'd spent 2 hours on, the asparagus with hollandaise sauce. We ate on my wobbly IKEA dining table, the one Ethan had to jam a folded napkin under to steady. Throughout the meal, he regaled us with tales of their trip. The exclusive hotel in Positano, the private yacht tour of Capri, the custom leather shoes he'd had made in Florence. Each story was a meticulously polished stone, hurled directly at the fragile glass of my fabricated life. He wasn't just sharing, he was holding up a mirror to my perceived failure. He talked about the down payment on their new Lincoln Park townhome, the membership at the East Bank Club, the preschool interviews for their unborn son. His life was a checklist of successes. And he made it clear that I hadn't ticked a single box. The final straw came with dessert. I brought out a homemade apple pie, my grandmother's recipe. It was the one thing I made that always felt perfect. Ethan took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then delivered the killing blow. It's good, Chloe. Really. You've gotten very domestic. I guess when you don't have much of a career, you have to find something to be good at. He looked at our parents and winked. At least she'll make someone a decent wife, right? My father chuckled. My mother offered another weak smile. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowing his casual cruelty, of playing the part of the meek, struggling artist, all of it coalesced into a single, ice-cold point of clarity. I had allowed this narrative to exist. I had built the cage they kept me in. I had handed them the key. And as I watched my brother, so confident in his judgment, so secure in his place above me, I decided with chilling certainty that I was going to burn that cage to the ground. He thought my world was this 400-square-foot apartment, this thrift store mug, this wobbly table. He had no idea that I was the one who owned the entire building his world was built in. He just couldn't see it yet. But he would. Oh, he would. I just had to wait for the perfect moment to invite him in. The evening ended with their perfunctory hugs at the door. Their car, a gleaming black BMW X5, roaring to life and disappearing down the quiet tree-lined street. I stood in the doorway for a long time, the cool autumn air, doing nothing to quell the fire in my chest. I walked back inside, looked at the messy table, the remnants of the meal, and I didn't feel sad or defeated. I felt a surge of something else, something terrifying and exhilarating. I felt like a predator that had finally been let out of its cage. After they left, I didn't clean up. I let the dirty dishes sit on the table, a monument to the Last Supper of the old Chloe. I walked through my tiny apartment, touching the things Ethan had silently condemned. The worn-out armchair, the stack of art books on the floor, the single, slightly sad-looking succulent on the windowsill. This place was a stage set, and I was its lead actress. For 3 years, I had lived a double life with a discipline that would impress a spy. By day, I was Chloe Vance, freelance designer, puttering around Logan Square in jeans and a hoodie, buying coffee at Gaslight, browsing the farmer's market. But for 10 to 12 hours a day, behind the closed door of my small bedroom, I was C.V. Thorne, co-founder and chief creative officer of Ether, a boutique software development firm that was quietly revolutionizing the user interface design for financial tech companies. Thorne was my mother's maiden name, a shield I'd picked up when my partner Ben and I decided to incorporate. "You sure you don't want to use Vance?" he'd asked over late-night pizza in our rented cubicle in the 1871 tech incubator at the Merchandise Mart. "Build your own name?" I shook my head. My family, they have a certain idea of what success looks like. I want to build this without their definition hanging over my head. It was a half-truth. I didn't just want to build it without their definition. I wanted to build it without them, especially without Ethan. My brother had a talent for taking things. When we were kids, if I built a Lego castle, he would find a way to improve it, adding his own pieces until he could claim it as a joint project, then eventually as his own. When I won a citywide art contest in high school, he told everyone he'd given me the idea. He didn't just want to win, he needed to be the only winner. I knew with absolute certainty that if he knew about Ether, he would try to get his hands on it. He'd offer his business expertise, he'd want to invest, he'd want a seat on the board. He would sink his perfectly polished claws into my creation and try to make it his. So, C.V. Thorne was born, a name with no history, no baggage, and most importantly, no brother. The first 2 years were a brutal, caffeine-fueled grind. Ben and I poured every cent we had, and many we didn't, into the company. I lived on ramen and cheap coffee, channeling all my creative energy not into the freelance projects I told my family about, but into designing the sleek, intuitive, and profoundly powerful interfaces that were now Ether's signature. Our first major contract came from a mid-sized investment firm in Chicago. They were impressed by our prototype, but the partners were old school. They wanted to meet the principals. Ben was the tech genius, a classic coder who was more comfortable with a keyboard than a boardroom. The creative vision, the sales pitch, that was all me. I remember buying a single expensive black suit from Nordstrom on a credit card that was screaming for mercy. I walked into that meeting on LaSalle Street, my heart pounding, and pitched our vision. I was no longer Chloe Vance, the timid younger sister. I was C.V. Thorne, a confident architect of digital reality, and we landed it. That contract was the first domino. Within 18 months, Ether was the name being whispered in the corridors of power from Chicago to New York. We were poached by venture capital firms. We hired a small, brilliant team. We moved out of the incubator and into a sleek office in the West Loop, and the money started coming in. Not a trickle, but a flood. My share of the profits in the last fiscal year alone was enough to buy my parents' house 10 times over. Yet, I kept the Logan Square apartment. I kept my 2012 Honda Civic. I kept my thrift store wardrobe. The deception became a kind of armor. At first, it was a necessity to protect my work, but after a while, it became something else. It was a private, satisfying secret. Every time Ethan made a snide comment about my finances or offered to help me out, I felt a dark little thrill. It was like holding a royal flush and letting your opponent think you had nothing but a pair of twos. I was waiting for the right time to lay my cards on the table. After that disastrous Sunday dinner, I knew the time was coming soon. I walked over to the closet and pushed aside my Chloe clothes. Behind them was a false panel I'd installed myself. Inside was a safe. I spun the dial and opened it. There they were, the blueprints indeed to my real home, a place not even my business partner Ben knew about. He assumed I'd invested my money, that I was living frugally by choice. He didn't know about Penthouse 8A at the Waldorf Astoria on East Walton Street. I'd bought it 6 months ago, paying in cash through a trust to keep my name off the public records. It was a sprawling 4,000-square-foot palace in the sky with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Lake Michigan and the entire Gold Coast. It was impeccably furnished by a designer I'd hired, filled with original art I'd curated myself. It was my sanctuary, my secret, my fortress of solitude, and soon it would be my stage. I pulled out the architectural plans, spreading them across the wobbly IKEA table. The glossy professional drawings were a stark contrast to the humble setting. I traced the lines of the master suite, the home theater, the sprawling terrace. This was my life, the real one, the one I had built with my own mind and my own hands. No help asked for, none given. Ethan thought he was on top of the world in his Lincoln Park townhome. He was living on a hill, while I was living in the clouds. I knew his weaknesses, his pride, his arrogance, his desperate need for public validation. My revenge wouldn't be a screaming match or a bitter confrontation. It would be quiet, it would be elegant, and it would be absolute. It would be a simple invitation. The perfect occasion was just 2 months away, my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my bones, exactly how I was going to ruin my brother's life with a single dinner party. The next 2 months were a masterclass in psychological warfare, so subtle that only I knew the game was being played. I leaned into the role of the struggling artist harder than ever. I'd call my mom and lament about a freelance client who was late on a payment, knowing the news would travel straight to Ethan. He'd then text me a link to a job posting for a receptionist position with a smarmy, "Just looking out for you, sis." I'd reply with a simple, "Thanks, I'll think about it." And I could almost feel his self-satisfaction radiating through the phone. I made a point of showing up to a family brunch in a sweater with a tiny, barely noticeable hole at the elbow. Jessica spotted it immediately, her eyes flicking to Ethan. with a look that said, "See, she's falling apart." It was a performance, and I was giving the performance of a lifetime. I was a ghost haunting the edges of their perfect, prosperous world, a constant, nagging reminder of the failure they thought they'd outrun. Meanwhile, C.V. Thorne was conquering the world. We secured a massive 7-figure contract with a banking conglomerate in Zurich. The work required me to fly to Switzerland twice. I told my family I was going to a design retreat in rural Wisconsin, a cheap getaway to clear my head. While they were picturing me in a drafty cabin, I was in a first-class suite on Swiss Air, finalizing a deal in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking Lake Zurich. I bought my father a vintage Patek Philippe watch for his upcoming birthday, a timepiece that cost more than Ethan's car, and hid it in the safe behind my false closet wall. The duality of my life was staggering. One day I was haggling over the price of organic kale at the Logan Square Farmers Market. The next I was at a charity auction, bidding against tech billionaires for a Jean-Michel Basquiat painting for the lobby of my penthouse. The penthouse itself was my secret weapon, and I prepared it with the precision of a general preparing a battlefield. The designer had finished the main decor, but I spent weeks adding the personal touches. I filled the bookshelves not just with impressive hardcovers, but with the worn paperbacks I'd loved since I was a child. I hung not only the expensive art, but also a few of my own charcoal sketches from college, pieces my family had once dismissed as a hobby. In the kitchen, stocked with cookware from Williams-Sonoma and appliances by Wolf, I placed the chipped thrift store mug, the one Ethan had mocked. It sat on the gleaming marble countertop, a humble king on a diamond throne. The true power of my brother, the thing that made him seem so untouchable, was his complete and utter control of the family narrative. He was the sun, and we were all expected to be planets orbiting him. His promotions, his bonuses, his vacations, these were the official holidays on the family calendar. Our parents were his willing accomplices. They'd spent their lives sacrificing to give us a comfortable suburban upbringing, and Ethan was their return on investment. He reflected their values, their aspirations. He was their success story. My apparent failure was a source of quiet shame for them, a problem to be managed. At a cousin's wedding, my dad pulled me aside. "Chloe, honey," he began, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Ethan was telling me his firm is doing really well. The end-of-year bonuses are going to be huge. He mentioned he might be able to help you with a down payment on a small condo, just to get you started so you can have some equity." I looked at my father, a man I loved, and saw the profound depth of my brother's influence. Ethan wasn't just bragging about his success. He was using it to position himself as my savior, my provider. He wanted me to be indebted to him, to be a permanent charity case under his benevolent rule. "Thanks, Dad," I said, my voice even. "I appreciate the thought. I'll manage on my own." He sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment, and patted my shoulder. "You're just so stubborn," he said, before walking away to join the circle of relatives, listening intently as Ethan described the custom interior of his new BMW. That was the moment I knew my revenge wasn't just about Ethan. It was about taking back my own story, not just from him, but from my entire family. I needed to show them that their son was just a lamp, and I was the one who owned the power company. My resolve, which had been hardening for weeks, solidified into a diamond. I went home that night and began to craft the plan for the anniversary party. I wasn't just going to host a dinner. I was going to create an experience, an immersive theatrical production in 3 acts: the deception, the reveal, and the reckoning. The deception was almost complete. The reveal would be the party itself. The reckoning would be the aftermath, the silence that followed the explosion. I knew a crucial piece of information that would make the final act even more devastating. My cousin, who worked at a rival investment firm, had let slip a few weeks prior that Ethan's sure thing investment fund was heavily overleveraged in a volatile biotech stock. He was playing with fire, putting on a brave face while his portfolio was likely bleeding out. His bravado, his lavish spending, it was all a desperate attempt to project an image of success that was, perhaps, as fake as my poverty. He was living in a house of cards, and I was about to introduce a hurricane. The final piece of the puzzle was the invitation. I spent an entire weekend designing it myself. It was printed on thick, creamy cardstock, the text a simple, elegant serif font. It read, "You are joyfully invited to celebrate the 40th wedding anniversary of Carol and David Vance." I listed the date and time, and then the address. 11 East Walton Street, Penthouse 8A, Chicago, Illinois. I didn't put my name on it as the host. I simply put, "Hosted by a loving daughter." I slipped them into their envelopes, my hands perfectly steady. I drove to the post office and mailed them, one to my parents, one to Ethan and Jessica. As I dropped them into the blue metal box, I felt a sense of profound and terrible peace. The trap was set. The invitations were like beautifully calligraphed missiles, streaking silently towards their targets. The countdown had begun. The phone call from Ethan came 2 days after I mailed the invitations, exactly as I had predicted. I let it ring 3 times before answering, affecting a slightly distracted, "Hello?" "Chloe, what is this?" he asked. No preamble. His voice was a mixture of confusion and amusement. "What is what?" I asked, playing dumb as I swirled paint on a canvas in my Logan Square apartment, a prop for my role. "This invitation for Mom and Dad's anniversary. It has some address in the Gold Coast. Did you make a typo? Or is this some kind of joke?" I could hear Jessica whispering in the background. I pictured them in their pristine beige living room, looking at the invitation as if it were an alien artifact. "No typo," I said calmly. "That's the address." There was a pause. Then a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It was the most condescending sound I had ever heard. "Right. Okay. You're hosting Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner in a penthouse at the Waldorf Astoria. Sure you are. Did you get a gig dog sitting for one of your rich clients?" This was the moment, the pivot point. I could have given him a hint, a small crack in the facade to let the light in. But that wasn't the plan. The plan required his arrogance to be at its absolute peak. "Something like that," I said, my voice airy and noncommittal. "Just make sure you're there at 7. And Ethan, dress nice." I hung up before he could respond. The conversation was a perfect little symphony of his prejudice, the immediate assumption that I couldn't possibly belong in such a place, that my only access would be as a servant. It was exactly the mindset I needed him to have when he walked through that door. My mother called next, her tone laced with genuine bewilderment. "Chloe, honey, we got your invitation. It's beautiful. But the address? Are you sure? It looks like a very expensive hotel." "It's all taken care of, Mom," I told her, my voice warm and reassuring. "Just a surprise for you and Dad. Don't worry about a thing." Unlike Ethan, she didn't question my ability, just the logistics. Her concern was sweet, but it was still rooted in the same narrative, that this was something far beyond my means, a grand gesture I couldn't possibly afford. The week of the party was a whirlwind of clandestine activity. I hired a private chef and a small catering staff, instructing them to meet me at the Penthouse on the day of the event. I arranged for a string quartet to play softly in the living area. I had magnificent floral arrangements delivered from HMR Designs, filling the space with the scent of lilies and roses. Every detail was curated to create an atmosphere of overwhelming, undeniable wealth and taste. The day before the party, I made one final trip to my Logan Square apartment. I packed a small overnight bag with the clothes I would wear. A simple, elegant black dress from a designer Ethan wouldn't recognize, but whose price tag was 4 figures, and a pair of Manolo Blahniks. Then I walked around the small space one last time. This little apartment had been my shield and my cocoon. It had protected my secret and allowed me to grow into the person I was meant to become, far from the suffocating shade of my family's expectations. I felt a pang of genuine affection for the place. I watered the succulent, wiped down the kitchen counter, and left the keys on the wobbly IKEA table with a note for the landlord. I would not be coming back. The night of the party, I was a bundle of calm, focused energy. The penthouse was aglow, the lights of Chicago twinkling outside the vast windows like a carpet of fallen stars. The string quartet was playing a soft Vivaldi piece. The chef was quietly preparing appetizers in the state-of-the-art kitchen. At 6:45 p.m., I took my position. I stood by the window, looking down at the city, a glass of champagne in my hand. I was no longer playing a role. I was simply me, Chloe Vance, C.V. Thorne. They were finally one and the same. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ethan. "We're downstairs. The doorman is looking at us like we're vermin. Are we supposed to use a service entrance?" I smiled. The performance had begun. I texted back a single line. "Give him your name. You're on the list." A few minutes passed. Then the private elevator that opened directly into my foyer chimed. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. I took a slow, deep breath, set down my champagne, and turned to face the door as it slid open. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive sigh. For a moment, my family just stood there, frozen in the small, wood-paneled car, blinking against the warm, golden light of my foyer. My parents, Carol and David, looked simply bewildered, their eyes wide as they took in the soaring ceilings, the abstract painting on the wall, the faint notes of a violin carrying from the other room. But Ethan and Jessica? Their expressions were a delicious, complex cocktail of disbelief and disdain. Ethan was wearing a suit, but it looked tight and uncomfortable on him now, as if he'd suddenly become an intruder in his own skin. Jessica clutched her Louis Vuitton handbag like a life raft, her perfectly made up face a mask of pinched confusion. They stared past me into the vast expanse of the living room, their eyes scanning the space, clearly looking for the real owner. They thought I was the welcoming committee, the hired help. "Chloe," Ethan said, stepping out of the elevator as if he were treading on uncertain ground. His voice had a forced, jovial tone that didn't quite cover his unease. "So, whose palace is this? One of your clients finally hit the lottery?" He looked around, a smirk playing on his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were doing frantic calculations, assessing the value of the art, the furniture, the sheer square footage. "Welcome," I said, my voice calm and even. I gave my mother and father a hug. They felt stiff, overwhelmed. "Mom, Dad, you look wonderful." "Chloe, what is all this?" my mom whispered, her eyes darting from the string quartet in the corner to the uniformed bartender polishing glasses behind a marble-topped bar. "This must have cost a fortune." "It's your anniversary," I said simply. "You deserve it." "So, are you going to introduce us to the owner?" Jessica asked, her voice a little too bright. "We're dying to meet the person who has such extravagant taste." The unspoken words hung in the air, unlike you. I smiled, a genuine, slow smile that I had been practicing in my mind for months. I stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter the main living area. "Please, come in. Make yourselves at home." I paused, letting the words settle, and then I delivered the line I had been waiting my entire adult life to say. "Everything you see, it's mine." The silence that followed was the most profound sound I have ever heard. It was heavier than stone. My parents stared at me, their mouths slightly agape, the comprehension dawning on their faces with agonizing slowness. But Ethan just froze. The smirk on his face didn't just disappear, it shattered. It was as if his entire facial structure had collapsed inward. His eyes, which a moment ago had been scanning the room with condescending appraisal, were now locked on my face, filled with a raw, unadulterated shock that was more satisfying than any screaming match could ever be. "What?" he finally managed to croak out. It was a pathetic little sound, a puff of air. "This is my home," I repeated, my voice still quiet, still calm. I walked over to the bar. "Can I get you all a drink? Champagne?" Jessica was the first to recover, her social instincts kicking in, though they were frayed at the edges. "Chloe, that's not funny," she said with a shaky laugh. "Seriously, where is the person who lives here?" I turned from the bar, holding a flute of champagne, and looked directly at her. "Jessica," I said, my tone gentle but firm, "I have never been more serious in my life. I live here. I own this penthouse. Now, would you like a glass of champagne or not?" My dad finally found his voice. "Chloe." "How? The freelance work?" "It couldn't possibly." And so the reveal began. I led them on a slow tour of my home. I showed them the gourmet kitchen, the 3 guest bedrooms, the home theater with its plush velvet seats. With every room, their silence deepened. I was a stranger to them, a woman they had never met. The struggling, slightly pathetic artist they had constructed in their minds had vanished, replaced by this person of substance, of power. We ended the tour on the sprawling outdoor terrace. The Chicago skyline was laid out before us, a breathtaking panorama of light and steel. The air was cool, and the city hummed with a distant energy. For the last 3 years, I began, turning to face them, "I haven't just been a freelance graphic designer. That was a story I told you to protect what I was really building." I told them everything. I told them about Ether, about my partnership with Ben, about CV Thorne. I told them about the years of 16-hour days, the sacrifices, the risks. I didn't embellish or boast. I stated the facts of my life, facts I had kept hidden for so long. My mother started to cry, soft, confused tears. My father just kept shaking his head, muttering, "I don't understand. Why wouldn't you tell us?" "Because," I said, and my gaze shifted to land squarely on Ethan. I needed to do it on my own, without any help, without any advice, without anyone trying to improve it or take credit for it. Ethan's face was pale, his skin looking waxy in the city lights. He hadn't said a word during the entire tour. He was like a statue, his mind furiously trying to process a reality that his ego could not accept. He was a man who defined himself by his position at the top of the family hierarchy. And in the span of 30 minutes, I had not just climbed the mountain. I had revealed that I owned the entire mountain range. "You're lying," he finally spat, his voice raw. "This is a rental. You're trying to embarrass me. You rented this place to make me look bad." His accusation was so pathetic, so desperate, that I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out my phone. I swiped through it and brought up a photo. It was a picture of me and Ben, taken a week ago, ringing the opening bell at the NASDAQ. Our company, Ether, had gone public. The IPO had been a staggering success. I had told no one. I held the phone out to him. "Does this look like I'm lying, Ethan?" He stared at the picture, at my smiling face on the giant screen overlooking Times Square. He looked from the phone to me and back again. The last vestiges of his denial crumbled, leaving behind something ugly and raw. It was hatred, pure, undiluted hatred. The caterer appeared at the terrace door. "Ms. Vance, dinner is ready to be served." The name, Vance not Thorne, seemed to hang in the air. I had reclaimed it. This was my name now, on my terms. I turned to my family. "Shall we eat?" I said, my voice as smooth as glass. The reckoning had arrived. Dinner was the most excruciatingly silent meal of our lives. The private chef served a 5-course meal that was, by any standard, a work of art. seared scallops with a saffron risotto, a delicate consommé, filet mignon cooked to perfection, a cheese course, and a decadent chocolate lava cake for dessert. We ate at a massive mahogany table that seated 12, with the glittering lights of Chicago as our wallpaper. The string quartet played softly in the background. It was a scene of perfect elegance, and it was as tense as a hostage negotiation. My parents made a few feeble attempts at conversation, asking me questions about Ether, their voices filled with a new, hesitant respect. They were trying to piece together the daughter they never knew. How did you start? Who is Ben? How did you keep this a secret for so long? I answered them calmly, giving them the broad strokes, the carefully edited version of my journey. I left out the parts about the loneliness, the fear, and the profound hurt that had fueled my deception. Ethan and Jessica were a black hole of rage at the center of the table. Jessica just picked at her food, her face a frozen mask of polite fury. She refused to look at me. But Ethan stared at his plate, his knuckles white as he gripped his silverware. He didn't eat. He just sat there, radiating a toxic silence. The man who had built his identity on being the center of attention, the one with all the stories, all the success, had been rendered mute. He had no more anecdotes about Italian yachts or Lincoln Park real estate that could possibly compete with the reality of the room we were in. He had spent years mocking my 400-square-foot apartment, and now he was a guest in a home that made his brand-new townhome look like a servant's quarters. The moment of absolute victory, the true checkmate, came during dessert. I had instructed the chef to serve coffee. The waiter brought out the cups and saucers, gleaming white porcelain from a designer collection. Then I stood up. "Excuse me for a moment," I said. I walked into the kitchen and returned with a single object in my hand. It was the chipped $1 ceramic mug from my Logan Square apartment. I placed it on the table next to my father's coffee cup. It looked absurdly out of place, a peasant in a king's court. "Dad," I said, my voice soft, "do you remember when I was in college and my car broke down? I called you both, panicking, because I had a final exam and no way to get there. You told me you were too busy with a golf tournament to help. But Ethan drove 2 hours in the middle of the night to come get me. He paid for the tow truck, and he sat with me at the diner all night while I studied. He bought me coffee in a mug that looked just like this one, and he told me I was the smartest person he knew and that I was going to be fine." I paused, letting the memory hang in the air. Ethan looked up at me for the first time, his eyes filled with confusion and a flicker of something else, shame. "That's the brother I remember," I continued, my voice still quiet. "Somewhere along the way, that guy disappeared. He was replaced by a man who measures his own worth by how small he can make other people feel. A man who would look at a mug like this and see only poverty, not the memory of a kindness he once did for his sister." I looked directly at him now. "I didn't build all of this to shame you, Ethan. I built it to protect myself from you. I hid my success because I was afraid you would do to it what you've done to everything else in my life. Try to make it about you, your mockery, your condescension. It wasn't about worrying for me. It was about feeding your own ego. You needed me to be small so you could feel big." I picked up the chipped mug. "This is just a thing. My apartment was just a place. My life isn't about what you see on the surface, and I'm sorry you've become someone who can no longer see beyond that." I turned and walked to the bar, placing the mug on the marble counter. When I turned back, Ethan was pushing his chair away from the table. He stood up, his movements jerky. "I need some air," he mumbled, not looking at anyone. He walked towards the terrace, his shoulders slumped. Jessica stood up to follow him. My mother finally broke down, burying her face in her hands. "We did this," she sobbed. "We encouraged him. We thought We were just so proud of him. My father reached out and put his hand on her shoulder, his own face a portrait of regret. The magnificent party I had planned had become a wake. It was the death of a family myth, and none of us knew what would rise from its ashes. The rest of the evening was a blur. My parents left soon after, their anniversary overshadowed by a family crisis. They hugged me at the door, a new, awkward distance between us. The happy, simple family dynamic was gone, replaced by something complicated and broken. After they were gone, I paid the caterers and the musicians, the penthouse slowly emptying until it was just me. I walked out onto the terrace. Ethan and Jessica had left without saying goodbye. The city lights seemed colder now, less triumphant. My grand, perfectly executed revenge felt hollow. I had won. I had shattered his smug world, exposed his arrogance, and reclaimed my own story in the most dramatic way imaginable. I had achieved everything I set out to do. So why did I feel so utterly, profoundly alone? The weeks that followed the anniversary party were defined by a deafening silence. My parents called, of course. They were tentative, apologetic, trying to navigate the new landscape of our family. They wanted to see the penthouse again, to hear more about Ether, to understand the woman I had become. It was a reconciliation of sorts, but it felt like getting to know a stranger. The easy familiarity of our past was gone, replaced by a careful, deliberate effort. We were rebuilding, but the foundation was cracked. From Ethan, there was nothing, not a text, not a call, not an email. He had vanished from my life. According to my mother, he and Jessica had stopped coming to Sunday dinners. He was busy with work, a transparent excuse for an anger and humiliation so profound he couldn't bear to face any of us. The family sun had imploded, collapsing into a black hole of resentment. I learned through the grapevine, that same cousin who worked at the rival firm, that Ethan's financial situation was even more precarious than I had imagined. The biotech stock he had bet on had plummeted, and he was facing catastrophic losses. He had been using his image of success as collateral, and now that image was shattered. The irony was bitter. While I had been pretending to be poor, he had been pretending to be rich. We were both living a lie, just on opposite ends of the spectrum. My lie, however, had a foundation of truth. His was built on air. I half expected a call from him, asking for money, a desperate, humbled plea for a bailout, but the call never came. His pride, it seemed, was the one asset he had left. I threw myself into my work. C.V. Thorne didn't have a broken family. She had board meetings and product launches and strategic plans. She flew to London and Tokyo. She was featured in Forbes magazine as a visionary of fintech. My public life was a string of brilliant successes. My private life was a quiet, empty penthouse overlooking a city that felt like it belonged to someone else. I often found myself standing on the terrace at night, looking down at the endless river of headlights, feeling a profound sense of a dislocation. I had built this empire, but for what? To prove a point to a brother who no longer spoke to me? One evening, about 3 months after the party, I was going through some old boxes I'd finally moved from storage. In the bottom of one, I found a shoebox full of old photographs. There we were, me and Ethan, as kids, building a snowman in the yard, our faces red from the cold. Me on my bike, him running alongside with his hand on the seat, teaching me how to ride. There was a photo from the night he'd rescued me from my broken-down car in college. We were in the diner, both of us looking exhausted, but he had his arm around me and we were both smiling. I saw the ghost of the boy he had been, the brother I had loved, and I felt a grief so sharp it stole my breath. My revenge hadn't just destroyed his pride. It had annihilated our entire shared history, burning the good memories along with the bad. He had become a monster of arrogance, but I had become a monster of vengeance. And I wondered, standing there in my silent, perfect home, who was truly the poorer for it. The end of the story, the real end, didn't come with a bang. It came with a simple, plain white envelope that arrived in my mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single key and a folded piece of paper. The key was to a storage unit in a grimy facility on the far west side of the city. The note had only a few lines, written in Ethan's familiar, sharp handwriting. "This is yours. I don't want it anymore." I knew immediately what it was. When our grandmother died, she had left us each a small inheritance. I had used mine to help start Ether. Ethan had used his to buy a vintage Porsche he couldn't afford to maintain, but she had also left us a box, a single shared inheritance of her personal things, old journals, photographs, family heirlooms. We had argued about who should keep it and eventually put it in a shared storage unit, a physical manifestation of our fractured relationship. His note was a final severing of ties. He was giving me the past. He didn't want any part of it. I never went to the storage unit. I left the key on my marble countertop. It sits there still, next to the chipped ceramic mug. They are my two ghosts, a match set. The ghost of a kindness once given, and the ghost of a brotherhood now lost. I had won the war, but in doing so, I had salted the earth of my own past. He had mocked my small apartment, and I had invited him to my palace. He thought he was looking down on me, but all along we were both just standing on opposite sides of a canyon I had dug myself. He always filled every room with his voice. Now, all I hear is the silence he left behind. The end